Admiral Jinwoo stood on the bridge of the TDF Nemesis, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched space itself tear open in front of him. One by one, human warships dropped out of hyperspace like sharks emerging from dark water. Each ship that appeared made his chest swell with pride. The humans had come in force. 57 ships of every type imaginable floated in perfect formation around his flagship. There were massive battleships with armor thick enough to stop asteroid impacts, sleek destroyers built for speed and precision strikes, heavy cruisers loaded with enough firepower to level entire cities, and dozens of smaller vessels, each one designed with a single purpose in mind: to fight and win. Unlike the elegant, beautiful ships that other alien species built, human vessels looked exactly like what they were: weapons of war. They had sharp angles, heavy armor plating, and gun barrels sticking out from every surface. Where alien ships looked like works of art floating through space, human ships looked like hungry predators ready to pounce. Lieutenant Hai-Jin sat at her communications console, trying to hide the big smile spreading across her face. She had been monitoring alien transmissions since the fleet arrived, and what she was hearing was making her day. "Admiral," she said, barely keeping the laughter out of her voice, "we're getting dozens of messages from the Etherin ships. They sound pretty shocked by how many of us showed up." Jinwoo allowed himself a small smile. He was a man in his 50s, with gray hair and scars on his hands from his younger days as a fighter pilot. He had spent 30 years in the Terra Defense Force, working his way up from a young hotshot to the commander of humanity's most powerful battle fleet. "I bet they are surprised," he replied, running his fingers through his beard. He sent out a request for help, thinking maybe we'd send 1 or 2 ships. They're about to learn something important about humans. When we show up to a fight, we show up to win. The truth was, Jinwoo had been expecting something like this for months. Human intelligence officers had been reporting strange incidents across 3 different sectors of space. Research stations going silent, trading posts mysteriously losing contact, scientific expeditions simply disappearing without a trace. Each time it happened, the same energy readings appeared just before everything went dark. The same unusual patterns of interference in communications. The same signs of something big and dangerous moving through space. The Galactic Council dismissed these reports as equipment failures or attacks by space pirates. They refused to believe that anything truly dangerous was happening. After all, the galaxy had been relatively peaceful for thousands of years. What could possibly threaten the advanced civilizations that controlled most of known space? But humans had seen this pattern before, not in space, but in their own history books. It was the same way armies prepared for war back on Earth. First, you scout the enemy. You attack isolated outposts to test their defenses. You probe for weaknesses. You learn how they fight, how they communicate, how they respond to threats. Then, when you know everything you need to know, you strike with overwhelming force. Jinwoo had recognized the signs immediately. Something was out there, something intelligent and dangerous, and it was preparing for a major attack. He had tried to warn the Galactic Council, but they had ignored him. Humans were still considered a young, primitive species by most aliens. What could these Deathworlders possibly know about galactic security? Standing on his bridge, surrounded by the most powerful fleet humanity had ever assembled, Jinwoo felt vindicated. The aliens were about to learn that being young and primitive didn't mean being stupid. Admiral Lieutenant Hai-Jin announced, "Captain Zira's ship is requesting communication." "Put her on the main screen," Jinwoo ordered. The massive display at the front of the bridge flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Etherin flagship. Captain Zira appeared in the center of the screen, her tall, graceful form glowing with soft blue light. Her species was known throughout the galaxy for their beauty, intelligence, and diplomatic skills. They were the peacekeepers, the negotiators, the ones who solved problems with words instead of weapons. But right now, Zira looked anything but peaceful. Her 6 eyes were wide with shock, and her normally calm voice carried a note of barely controlled amazement. "Admiral Jinwoo," she began, her words translated by the communication system into perfect Korean, "your response far exceeds our expectations. The Galactic Council's request was for reconnaissance assistance only. Expected perhaps 1 or 2 ships for a simple evacuation mission. Jinwoo's smile became predatory, showing just a hint of teeth. It was the kind of smile that had made enemy pilots think twice about engaging him in combat back when he was still flying fighters. "Captain Zira," he replied, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. "You made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed that we see this as your problem." The Etherian captain's expression shifted from shock to confusion. "I don't understand, Admiral. The incident is occurring at a research station in neutral space. How is this a human concern?" Jinwoo stepped closer to the main screen, his presence filling the bridge. Around him, his crew continued their work with quiet efficiency, but he could feel their attention focused on the conversation. "Dr. Minho isn't just some random researcher. Captain, he's one of ours. A human being working under the protection of the Terra Defense Force. When someone threatens our people, when someone hurts our citizens, it becomes very much our problem." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You see, Captain, there's something about humans that the rest of the galaxy hasn't quite figured out yet. We don't just protect our home planet. We don't just defend our own territory. When we claim someone as one of ours, when we give our word that we'll keep them safe, we mean it, no matter where they are, no matter what threatens them." Captain Zira's blue glow seemed to dim slightly as she processed what Jinwoo was telling her. "But Admiral, 57 ships seems excessive for an evacuation mission. ... Jinwoo's expression became deadly serious. "Captain, this stopped being an evacuation mission the moment Dr. Minho mentioned the Devourers. You called us for help and we're here to give it. But we're not here to run away from whatever scared your people. We're here to make sure it never scares anyone again." The silence that followed was broken only by the quiet hum of the ship's engines and the soft beeping of various instruments. Captain Zira stared at Jinwoo for a long moment, clearly trying to understand what kind of species she was dealing with. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter now. "Admiral, do you understand what the Devourers are? Do you comprehend the danger they represent?" Jinwoo nodded slowly. "I've read the historical records, Captain. Ancient enemy, supposedly extinct, consumed entire civilizations. Very impressive. But here's what I think you don't understand about humans. We've been dealing with ancient enemies our entire existence, and we're still here." Admiral Jinwoo stood on the bridge of the TDF Nemesis, his weathered hands gripping the metal railing as he watched something that filled him with fierce pride. Space itself seemed to split open in front of his flagship, and through those tears, in reality, came the most impressive sight in human military history. Ship after ship dropped out of hyperspace, each one appearing with a flash of blue light that briefly illuminated the dark void around them. First came the battleships, massive hulking beasts of metal and firepower that looked like floating fortresses. Their armor was thick enough to survive direct hits from planet-killing weapons, and their gun batteries could reduce entire fleets to space dust. Next came the heavy cruisers, sleek but deadly vessels designed for long-range combat. These ships carried the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built, along with shields that could deflect almost any attack. Behind them followed the destroyers, smaller, faster ships built for hit-and-run tactics and precision strikes. It wasn't just the big ships that impressed Jinwoo. Scattered throughout the fleet were dozens of support vessels, each one crucial to the operation. Medical ships equipped with the most advanced healing technology, supply ships carrying enough ammunition and fuel to fight a war for months. Electronic warfare vessels designed to jam enemy communications and disable their targeting systems. In total, 57 ships now floated in perfect formation around the Nemesis. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled outside of their home system. And every single vessel was crewed by the best and brightest the Terra Defense Force had to offer. What made Jinwoo especially proud was how different human ships looked compared to the vessels built by other alien species. When the Etherians built a ship, they focused on beauty and elegance. Their vessels looked like works of art floating through space, smooth curves and graceful lines that pleased the eye. The Zephyrians preferred function over form, building practical ships that were efficient and reliable but boring to look At their vessels were basically flying boxes with engines attached, designed by engineers who cared more about fuel efficiency than aesthetics. But human ships. Human ships looked exactly like what they were, predators built for war. Every line, every angle, every surface was designed with one purpose in mind: to fight and win. They had sharp edges that could slice through enemy armor. Gun barrels jutted out from every surface like the fangs of some massive space-borne beast. Even when they were just sitting still, human warships looked hungry for battle. Lieutenant Hyjin sat at her communications console, her fingers dancing across the controls as dozens of messages poured in from the alien ships already in the area. She was a young officer, barely 25 years old, but she had already proven herself to be one of the best communication specialists in the fleet. Right now, she was having trouble keeping a straight face as she listened to the incoming transmissions. "Admiral," she said, fighting back laughter. "We're getting messages from Captain Zira's fleet. They sound... Well, sir, they sound pretty shocked by how many of us showed up." Lou allowed himself a small smile. He was a man in his mid-50s, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes from years of staring out at the stars. His hands bore the scars of his younger days as a fighter pilot, back when he used to engage enemy ships in single combat among the asteroids. "I bet they are," he replied, running his fingers through his beard. "When they sent out their little request for help, they probably expected us to send maybe one ship, two at the most. They're about to learn something very important about humanity. When we show up for a fight, we don't mess around." The truth was, Jinwoo had been preparing for this moment for months. Human intelligence networks throughout the galaxy had been reporting disturbing incidents across multiple sectors of space. Research stations going silent without warning. Trading posts losing all contact with the outside world. Scientific expeditions simply vanishing as if they had never existed. At first, these incidents seemed random and unconnected. But Jinwoo had served in the military long enough to recognize patterns that others missed. Each disappearance was preceded by the same unusual energy readings, the same strange interference patterns in subspace communications, the same sensor ghost signatures that appeared just before everything went dark. The Galactic Council had dismissed these reports as equipment malfunctions or attacks by common space pirates. After all, the galaxy had been relatively peaceful for thousands of years. The major powers had settled into comfortable territories. Trade flowed freely between systems. And the biggest conflicts were usually diplomatic disputes over mining rights or shipping lanes. But Jinwoo knew better. He had studied military history his entire life, both human and alien, and he recognized the signs of something much more dangerous than random pirate attacks. This was systematic, methodical, intelligent. Someone or something was probing the galaxy's defenses, testing response times, learning how different species communicated and fought, gathering intelligence for something bigger. It was exactly the same pattern human armies had used throughout history when preparing for major campaigns. First, you scout the enemy territory. You attack isolated outposts to see how quickly reinforcements arrive. You capture prisoners and interrogate them to learn about enemy tactics and technology. You probe for weaknesses in their defenses. Then, when you have all the information you need, you strike with overwhelming force. Jinwoo had tried to warn the Galactic Council about his suspicions, but they had politely ignored him. Humans were still considered a young, primitive species by most alien civilizations. They had only been part of galactic society for a few decades, while some of the council members had civilizations spanning millions of years. What could these newcomers possibly know about galactic security that the ancient races didn't already understand? Now, as Jinwoo watched his massive fleet take up positions around the research station, he felt a grim satisfaction. The aliens were about to learn that being young didn't mean being naive, and being primitive didn't mean being stupid. "Admiral," Lieutenant Hyjin announced, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "Captain Zira is requesting a direct communication link." "Put her on the main screen," Jinwoo ordered, straightening his uniform and stepping forward to face the massive display that dominated the front of the bridge. The screen flickered to life. Captain Zira stood in the center of the image, her tall, graceful form surrounded by the soft blue glow that her species naturally emitted when under stress. Etherians were widely considered to be among the most beautiful species in the galaxy. They were tall and slender, with smooth skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. They had large, expressive eyes and voices that carried musical harmonics that most other species found soothing. They were also known as master diplomats and peacekeepers. When conflicts arose between different species, it was usually the Etherians who stepped in to mediate and find peaceful solutions. They had a reputation for being calm, logical, and almost impossibly patient. But right now, Captain Zero looked anything but calm. Her 6 eyes were wide with shock, and when she spoke, her normally melodious voice carried notes that the translation system rendered as barely controlled amazement. Admiral Jinwoo, she began, her words automatically translated into perfect Korean by the communication system. Your response to our situation far exceeds any projections we made. The Galactic Council's request was specifically for reconnaissance assistance and possible evacuation support. We anticipated perhaps 1 or 2 vessels for what should be a relatively simple operation. Jinwoo's expression shifted into what his crew had learned to recognize. As his combat smile, the predatory grin that appeared just before he did something that made enemy commanders very, very nervous. Captain Zira, he replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had never lost a battle. I think you made a fundamental error in your calculations. You assumed that we would see this as your problem to solve. Dr. Minho crouched behind an overturned table in what used to be the station's main quantum physics laboratory. His hand shook as he held a small emergency communicator, the only piece of equipment still working in the entire section. Around him, the lab was a disaster zone. Expensive scientific instruments lay scattered across the floor like broken toys. Computer screens flickered with static or displayed error messages in languages he didn't recognize. He had been hiding in this room for 18 long, terrifying hours. 18 hours since the first devourer had broken through the station's outer hull. 18 hours since his world had turned into a nightmare that shouldn't exist. Through the thick, reinforced glass window, Minho could see something that filled him with both hope and dread. Ships were arriving. Lots of them. The elegant flowing curves of Etherian vessels floated gracefully through space, their hulls glowing with soft bioluminescent patterns that marked them as peaceful exploration ships. But beside them, looking like wolves among sheep, were the human warships. Where the Etherian vessels were beautiful and artistic, the human ships were pure business. They bristled with weapon systems, their angular hulls designed for one purpose only, to fight and win wars. Even sitting still, they looked hungry for battle. Minho felt a surge of fierce pride despite his terror. Those were his people out there, humans who had come to help when the rest of the galaxy thought this was just another minor incident. With trembling fingers, he activated his communicator and sent a transmission to the human flagship. Admiral Jinwoo, this is Dr. Minho at Kepler Research Station. Thank God you're here. But sir, you need to understand what we're really dealing with. The Devourers aren't just some ancient enemy from the history books. They're not the mindless monsters that the old stories describe. He paused, trying to find the right words to explain something that shouldn't be possible. They've been learning, Admiral, adapting. Every species they've encountered over the millions of years they were supposed to be extinct. They've absorbed their technology, their knowledge, their very essence. They're not the same creatures. Ancestors defeated long ago. Minho crawled to his makeshift scanner setup, a combination of salvaged equipment he had jury-rigged to monitor the space around the station. What he saw on the display made his blood run cold. Massive shapes were rising from the gas giant's thick atmosphere like ancient sea, monsters surfacing from the depths of an ocean. Each one was easily the size of a battleship, but they moved through space with organic grace that no mechanical vessel could match. Their surfaces rippled and shifted as if they were alive, which Minho now knew they were. But what terrified him most wasn't their size or their movement. It was the fact that they were talking to each other. Admiral, they're broadcasting coordinated tactical communications. Military frequencies, encrypted battle commands, strategic planning discussions. These aren't mindless beasts acting on instinct. They're organized. They have a command structure. They're planning this attack with the same level of sophistication as any modern military force. Admiral Jinwoo's voice came through the communicator, calm and steady, despite the impossible situation they were facing. Dr. Minho, are you injured? How many other survivors are there? I'm not hurt, sir, just scared out of my mind. There are maybe 12 or 14 of us left, scattered throughout the station. We've been hiding wherever we could find shelter. But Admiral Minho's voice dropped to a whisper as he watched his scanner display. I don't think survival was ever the point of this attack. The first devourer to fully emerge from the gas giant was a nightmare that would haunt Minho's dreams for the rest of his life. It looked like someone had taken the sleek biotechnology of the Etherians, the heavy combat plating of the Zephyrians, and the energy weapons of a dozen other species, then somehow fused them all together into a single impossible creature. Parts of its body glowed with the same soft light as Etherian ships, but underneath that glow was armor plating that looked suspiciously similar to human battlecruiser hulls. Weapon systems that belonged to at least 5 different alien civilizations jutted from its surface like the spines of some cosmic porcupine. They've been testing us, Minho continued, his voice growing more urgent as he understood the full scope of what was happening. Not just our technology or our weapons. They've been studying our psychology, our tactics, our will to fight. Every ship they've encountered, every station they've attacked, every species they've come into contact with, it was all research. Through the station's external cameras, Minho watched as more devourers emerged from the gas giant's depths. Each one was different from the others, but they all shared the same horrifying characteristic. They incorporated elements from the ships and species around them. One devourer had weapon systems that looked exactly like the ones mounted on Captain Zira's flagship. Another had propulsion systems that were clearly copied from human destroyer engines. A third showed signs of Zephyrian shield technology integrated into its biological structure. They weren't just killing their enemies. They were becoming them. Admiral Minho whispered, his voice barely audible as the full horror of the situation hit him. I don't think they want to destroy us. I don't think they want to conquer us or drive us away, or any of the things that normal enemies do. Watched as one of the devourers extended what looked like scanning tendrils toward the human fleet, clearly analyzing their ship's design and capabilities in real time. I think they want to become us, all of us. Every species, every technology, every piece of knowledge in the galaxy, they want to absorb it all and make it part of themselves. The implications were staggering. If the devourers could absorb and integrate the capabilities of every species they encountered, then fighting them with conventional tactics would be useless. Every weapon used against them would eventually be turned back on their creators. Every defensive strategy would be analyzed, understood, and countered. Admiral Minho said, his voice growing stronger as determination replaced fear. We can't fight them the way we've always fought wars. They'll learn from everything we do and use it against us. We need to do something they can't predict, something they can't analyze and copy. Through his communicator, he could hear the sounds of the human bridge officers giving orders, equipment humming with power, the controlled chaos of a military ship preparing for battle. Dr. Minho, Admiral Jinwoo's voice came through clearly, carrying a note of grim understanding. You're telling me that these things have been studying us for months? Learning our capabilities? Preparing for this confrontation? Yes, sir. This isn't a random attack or an invasion. It's the final exam in a course they've been taking for who knows how long, and we're the test subjects. Minho looked out at the combined fleet of human and alien ships, then at the growing number of devourers emerging from the gas giant. The good guys were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that could adapt to any strategy they used. But as he watched the human warships take up battle positions with calm efficiency, Minho felt a spark of hope the devourers might have studied human military tactics and technology. But there was one thing about humans that couldn't be learned from external observation. Sometimes, when the situation was hopeless and the odds were impossible, humans did something that no logical analysis could predict. They got creative, Commander. Veltar stood on the bridge of his warship, staring at the tactical display with a growing sense of dread that his 17 battles of experience had never prepared him for. The Zephyrian warrior was built like a tank. His natural exoskeleton was thick and gray, covered with battle scars that told the story of nearly 2 decades of military service. Each scar represented a different conflict, a different enemy he had faced and defeated. There was the jagged line across his left shoulder from the Proxima campaign, where rebel forces had tried to break away from the Galactic Council. The burn mark on his chest came from the Solar Wars, when 2 mining corporations had hired private armies to settle their territorial disputes with violence instead of lawyers. But as Veltar watched the sensor readings flowing across his screens, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his very first battle as a young soldier. Genuine, bone-deep fear. "Admiral Jin Woo," he reported through the communication system, his voice steady despite the terror growing in his mind. "The Devourers aren't behaving like any enemy force I've ever encountered. They're not attacking us." He paused, checking his readings again to make sure he wasn't making a mistake. "They're studying us, sir. Each Devourer vessel is maintaining a precise distance from our ships, close enough to get detailed sensor readings, but far enough away to avoid any aggressive action on our part. They're running through different energy signatures, testing the limits of our scanning equipment, learning exactly what we can and cannot detect." Veltar had commanded fleet actions before. He knew how space battles were supposed to work. 2 forces would meet. There would be some preliminary maneuvering as each side tried to gain tactical advantage. Then the shooting would start. Ships would be destroyed. Brave soldiers would die. And eventually one side would win while the other retreated or surrendered. But this was something completely different and infinitely more terrifying. Commander Admiral Jin Woo's voice came through the speakers. "What do your long-range sensors show? Are we facing their full strength?" Veltar's clawed fingers danced across his control panel, pulling up the deep space scanning results. What he saw made his exoskeleton seem to grow even thicker as his body instinctively prepared for danger. "Admiral long-range scans indicate at least 300 Devourer entities still within the gas giant's atmosphere. What we're seeing here, maybe 40 or 50 creatures, that's only a fraction of their actual force." Captain Zira's musical voice joined the conversation, her harmonic tones carrying notes that the translation system rendered as deep concern. "Commander Veltar is correct," she said from her elegant bridge. "My science officers confirm his readings. The Devourers are only showing us what they want us to see. This entire encounter has been carefully orchestrated to give us a specific impression of their capabilities." Admiral Jinwoo felt a familiar sensation settling over his mind, the cold, calculating focus that had kept him alive through 30 years of military service. It was the same mental state he had learned to enter when facing impossible odds. When the difference between life and death came down to making the right decision in a split second. "Dr. Minho," he said, his voice cutting through the chatter, "on the communication channels, you mentioned that they've been studying our psychology. What exactly did you discover about their research methods?" Minho's voice came through clearly despite the interference from the damaged research station. "Admiral, they've been monitoring everything. Our communication patterns, our tactical responses, our decision-making processes under stress. Every time we've encountered them, every move we've made, every strategy we've employed, they've been recording it all and analyzing it." The young scientist paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a note of horrified understanding. "But sir, they're not just copying our methods. They're trying to predict our behavior. They're building psychological profiles of how different species react to various threats and situations." "And have they succeeded in predicting us?" Jinwoo asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "That's what terrifies me most, Admiral. Based on their current movement patterns and positioning, I believe they expected exactly this type of response from us. The number of ships, the tactical formation, even the species composition of our combined fleet, it all matches what they would have calculated as our most likely reaction to this situation." The silence that followed was broken by a new voice cutting through the Amacy communication channel. It was dry, sardonic, and carried the kind of dark humor that military personnel often developed when facing impossible situations. "Lieutenant Commander Saw Young here, broadcasting from the science vessel Curiosity. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the tactical situation, and I've got some good news and some bad news for you." Ginwoo recognized the voice immediately. So-young was one of his best intelligence officers. A young woman with a brilliant analytical mind and a talent for seeing patterns that others missed. She also had a reputation for finding unconventional solutions to complex problems. "Give me the bad news first, Commander," Ginwoo ordered. "The bad news is that Dr. Minho is absolutely right. This is a trap, and we walked right into it exactly the way they wanted us to. The Devourers have studied our military doctrine, our standard operating procedures, our predictable response patterns. They knew we would bring a combined fleet. They knew we would try to establish a defensive perimeter around the research station. They probably even knew which specific ships we would send." So-young paused for a moment, and Ginwoo could almost hear her grinning through the communication system. The good news, however, is that while they may have studied us extensively, they're about to learn the most important thing about humans. We are absolutely terrible at doing what we're supposed to do. Several of the alien commanders made confused noises through their translators, but Ginwoo found himself smiling for the first time since the crisis had begun. "Explain your thinking, Commander," he said. "Sir, they've obviously done their homework on human military tactics. Studied our textbooks, analyzed our historical battles, learned our standard responses to different types of threats. But there's one thing about humans that you can't learn from external observation." So-young's voice carried the confidence of someone who had just figured out the solution to an impossible puzzle. "They've studied our military doctrine, but they haven't accounted for the fact that humans have a very special talent for creative problem-solving under pressure, especially when we're facing impossible odds and we're really, really angry about it." Commander Veltar's translator struggled with what sounded suspiciously like human laughter coming through the command channel. "What are you thinking, So-young?" Ginwoo asked, his tactical mind already beginning to see the possibilities. "Admiral, every military academy in the galaxy teaches the same basic principles of space warfare. Maintain formation integrity, concentrate firepower on priority targets, preserve your assets for maximum strategic impact. The Devourers have studied these principles and prepared countermeasures for all of them." She paused dramatically. "But humans didn't learn warfare in military academies, sir. We learned it by surviving on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. And when humans get backed into a corner with no good options, we tend to do something that no amount of tactical analysis can predict. Which is, get creative, sir. Very, very creative." At exactly 14:23 Galactic Standard Time, the trap was sprung. The gas giant's thick atmosphere suddenly erupted with movement as hundreds of Devourer vessels burst upward like a swarm of angry hornets. They moved in perfect coordination, their formation flawless, their targeting priorities calculated with mathematical precision. Each creature had been assigned specific targets based on detailed analysis of the Allied fleet's capabilities and weaknesses. It should have been a massacre. The Devourers had superior numbers, better positioning, and the element of surprise. They had studied every major space battle in galactic history and crafted the perfect tactical response. Their attack was textbook perfect, a coordinated assault that would overwhelm the enemy's defenses and destroy their ability to fight back. There was just one problem with their perfect plan. They were fighting humans. "All ships," this is Admiral Ginwoo. His voice cut through the chaos of battle communications with absolute calm. "Execute Protocol Thermopylae. Repeat, all human vessels, execute Protocol Thermopylae immediately." Captain Zero watched in complete shock as the human fleet suddenly began what could only be described as organized madness. Instead of maintaining their defensive formation like any sane military force would do, the human ships scattered in every direction like startled fish. Some dove toward the gas giant's atmosphere, others climbed away from the planetary plane, and a few actually charged directly at the largest Devourer vessels. "Admiral Ginwoo," she transmitted, her harmonic voice carrying notes of panic that her translators struggled to render. "Your fleet is breaking formation. Ships are abandoning their assigned positions. This completely violates every principle of standard space combat doctrine. But instead of sounding concerned, Admiral Ginwu's reply carried something that made Zira's blood run cold, the calm confidence of a predator, who had just revealed his true nature. "Captain Zira, there's something you need to understand about humans. We wrote the book on asymmetric warfare. When something bigger and stronger shows up to fight us, we don't try to outmuscle it. We get creative." What Zira was witnessing wasn't chaos. It was controlled insanity. The human ships weren't running away or falling apart under pressure. They were executing a battle plan that no military academy in the galaxy would have taught, because it violated every logical principle of space combat. The TDF destroyer Defiance, its hull cracked and atmosphere venting from multiple breaches, suddenly changed course and accelerated directly toward the largest Devourer vessel. The alien creature, confused by this apparent suicide run, tried to destroy the approaching ship with its organic weapons systems, but the Defiance wasn't trying to survive the encounter. It was trying to cause maximum damage with its death. Explosion when the human destroyer rammed into the Devourer lit up the gas giant's upper atmosphere like a second sun. The blast was so intense that it temporarily blinded sensors across the entire battle zone. But instead of mourning the loss of their ship, the human fleet used the chaos and confusion to execute a maneuver that left every alien commander speechless. They retreated, not in any organized fashion, not following any tactical manual, but in a wild, seemingly panicked scatter that made them look like they were fleeing in terror. The Devourers, confident in their superior numbers and convinced that they had broken the enemy's will to fight, immediately gave chase. After all, their psychological profiles indicated that most species would attempt to escape when faced with overwhelming odds. But the humans weren't most species. Dr. Minho, Admiral Jinwoo's voice came through the communication system with deadly calm. "I need you to prepare the quantum resonance cascade device. 30 seconds on my mark." From his hiding place in the research station, Minho's voice came back filled with horror. "Admiral, if I trigger that device, it will create a chain reaction that destroys the entire research station. Everyone still aboard will die, including me." Dr. Minho Ginwoo replied, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had made impossible decisions before. "I need you to trust me. Sometimes the only way to win a war is to make sure that everyone loses." What the Devourers had failed to understand about human psychology was that humans didn't fight wars to win. They fought wars to make sure their enemies couldn't win either. When backed into a corner with no good options, humans would choose mutual destruction over surrender every single time. The quantum cascade device had been designed as a research tool to study the gas giant's unusual atmospheric properties. But when Minho activated it, it became something else entirely, a weapon of mass destruction that tore through the planet's thick atmosphere like a cosmic wildfire. The expanding energy wave consumed everything in its path. The Devourer staging area, hidden deep within the gas giant's clouds, was incinerated in seconds. Hundreds of creatures that had been waiting to join the battle were destroyed before they even knew what was happening. But the real genius of Admiral Jinwoo's plan wasn't the destruction of the Devourer reserves. It was what happened next. The ancient creatures, caught between the expanding wave of destruction behind them and what they thought was a fleeing human fleet in front of them, suddenly found themselves in the worst possible tactical position. They were trapped in open space with nowhere to run and no way to retreat. That's when the human fleet stopped running and turned around. What the Devourers had mistaken for a panicked retreat had actually been a carefully orchestrated trap. Human ships had scattered to draw their enemies away from the gas giant, then regrouped at predetermined coordinates. Now, with the Devourer reserves destroyed and their enemies strung out in pursuit formation, the humans struck back with devastating effectiveness. The battle that followed was swift and brutal. The Devourers, for all their intelligence and adaptability, had been outmaneuvered by a species they had underestimated. One by one, their vessels fell to the combined firepower of human, Etherian, and Zephyrian ships. As the last Devourer vessel exploded in a brilliant flash of light, Admiral Jinwoo opened a communication channel to the entire Allied fleet. "This is Admiral Ginwoo, to all Allied vessels. The Devourers made one critical error in their calculations. They assumed that because they had evolved into apex predators, they were automatically at the top of the food chain. The satisfaction of a hunter who had just brought down dangerous prey. They forgot that humans evolved on a world where literally everything was trying to kill us. The weather, the animals, the plants, the bacteria, even the planet itself. In over millions of years of evolution, we got very, very good at killing back. Captain Zira's response came through the communication system, her harmonic voice carrying notes that her translator rendered as profound respect and just a hint of fear. Admiral Jin Wu, I believe the Galactic Council has severely underestimated your species. Your tactical approach was unlike anything in our military databases. Jin Wu's laugh was sharp and predatory, carrying the dangerous humor of a apex predator, who had just reminded everyone why his species had survived on a death world. Captain Zira, the Council made the same mistake the Devourers did. They looked at humans and saw a young, primitive species that barely deserved a seat at the galactic table. They forgot one crucial fact about Deathworlders. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. When you call us for help, you don't get a rescue mission. You get a reckoning. The Devourers were extinct. Again, and the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about the difference between asking for assistance and calling for vengeance. The humans hadn't just saved the day. They had reminded everyone why you should never, ever threaten something that a Deathworlder considered worth protecting.